At the midpoint of the year, we asked industry experts how H1 developed and what they're watching as we head into H2. Dealmaking, direct-to-patient sales, commercial strategy, patient access, and AI. I'm Steve Appizato with Pharmaceutical Commerce, and here's H1 in review and what's coming in H2. Starting with the deals, according to Roel van den Akker, deals partner at PwC, the sector has tracked 36 deals worth more than $1 billion apiece through the first half of 2026, roughly $140 billion combined. Annualized, that's a pace that could potentially pass $300 billion for the year, one of the most active stretches in recent memory.
By historical standard, I would characterize as a very, very active market, right? Why is it active? Multiple reasons, right? Like you alluded to one, right? We do see people leaning into fascinating science and addressing some of those, portfolio and pipeline gaps, right? Like LOE pressures and pipeline gaps, right? I do think we've generally seen, a fair amount of optimism from C-suite executives around the general deal-making and policy environment in the United States, which is still like sort of largely the bedrock of pharma M&A. Confidence and kind of corporate balance sheets and dry powder and deal capacity are still quite healthy. So, I would characterize the first 6 months as, fairly strong, exciting science, generally good sort of optimism in the sector. And I don't really see that abating anytime soon in the second half of the year. Now, listen, will it replicate at the same rate in the back half? We don't know, but I think it's a pretty active environment, and I think it's probably panned out a bit beyond our expectations as we had them at the beginning of the year.
The hunting grounds look familiar: immunology, oncology, metabolic disease, and RNA-based therapies. What's newer, he says, is the shape some of these deals are taking. Instead of licensing one compound at a time, U.S. companies are striking deeper co-development and co-commercialization deals with Chinese biotechs. Van den Akker sees little reason for the pace to slow in H2, even if H1's peak is hard to repeat. In a January piece, Gift Health CEO Chip Parkinson noted that pricing pressure and rising consumer expectations were set to push manufacturers towards direct-to-patient platforms. 6 months later, Parkinson says it moved faster than he originally expected, with 3 key developments happening in the first 150 days.
First one is government got into the arena. So that wasn't in place in January. Trump RX launched in February, so early February. 17 MFN deals signed so far with Trump RX. Saw the addition of generics to the platform. So obviously, Trump RX is what it is. You access manufacturer websites through Trump RX, but it definitely raised the idea of price transparency, behind his name. Second one, I think actually is probably more consequential than anything else, which is the OIG guidance in February around, being able to serve lower priced drugs to patients through cash pay, even Medicaid and Medicare patients. So typically, anti-kickback statute was a big concern for a lot of manufacturers and why they sat on the sideline for direct-to-patient. Now all of that's been cleared. So that would be the second one that I think is really interesting. And then the third one is just some of the top 5 pharma announcing platforms, DTP platforms, since we last talked. And you have some major pharma brands launching those programs, not just a coupon. Coupons have been around for a long time, as we know, but actually a platform, standing up a platform to deal with patients who could benefit from a cash pay. So those 3 things probably stand out the most for me in the first 6 months of the year.
Now, Parkinson calls these shifts structural, not cyclical, and expects it to push next into specialty drugs in H2, where the access problems and money are both concentrated. He also expects cash pay and insurance pay to converge onto shared rails rather than relying on separate tracks. Now on access, the picture is more mixed. According to Amy Niles, Chief Mission Officer at the Patient Advocate Foundation, there's real process progress. However, process is not the same as affordability, Niles says. a federal payment plan meant to cap what Medicare beneficiaries pay out of pocket saw just 7% opt-in last year, according to research her organization commissioned with IQVIA. While beneficiaries who did take advantage of this program were less likely to abandon their therapy, most eligible patients, she says, still don't know the program exists. Niles' bigger worry, however, is coverage. Citing KFF data, Niles says about 18.5 million Medicaid enrollees will soon need to prove compliance with new work requirements, and she expects millions to lose coverage, not from ineligibility, but simply from the burden of the paperwork.
The rules seem a lot more restrictive than they were originally conveyed. People are going to need to provide documentation about their work requirements or their volunteer commitments, and they're going to be needing a statement from their healthcare provider, their medical provider, that their health condition prevents them from working. And on top of that, each state is going to have their own guidelines in terms of the severity of the medical conditions. So as a result of all this, unfortunately, we anticipate millions of people ending up without Medicaid coverage. One, because they may not meet the work requirements, and two, there's just a whole lot of administrative burden and paperwork. So people might just be inclined to say, forget it, I'm not going to do that. And as a result, millions will go without coverage. It's going to tax the healthcare system significantly, I think, moving forward. As we look at the exchanges, I'm not terribly optimistic here either. I think we'll continue to see double-digit increases in healthcare insurance premiums. These are already taxing millions of individuals. And we know that as of February 2026, 3 million people had dropped out of the exchanges. So I think all of this does not bode well in terms of patient affordability for care, including prescription medications.
According to Rum Marketing CEO Emma Banks, last year was a year of two halves, with optimism giving way to caution. This year, she says, the dividing line has moved. It's now visibility versus uncertainty, with companies with strong order books moving with confidence while everyone else is fighting for every opportunity. Budgets aren't being cut outright, but every decision is getting more scrutiny. More senior stakeholders are involved in procurement and timelines are stretching out. On AI, Banks says her prediction from earlier this year held. Automation is absorbing the routine execution level work across commercial teams, but what's still unresolved, according to her, is bigger than any single tool. It's figuring out where human judgment still earns its keep. So what does the back half of the year actually look like according to the people watching it closest? On Dealmaking, Vandenacker expects the active M&A environment to continue, supported by strong balance sheets and improving IPO and biotech sentiment. Though he's cautious, H1's pace may be difficult to fully sustain. On direct-to-patient, Parkinson predicts platforms push further into specialty drugs. Cash pay and insurance pay converge onto shared rails, a formal OIG safe harbor advances, and hybrid models become standard at launch rather than an afterthought. On access, Niles expects continued strain on Medicaid and the ACA exchanges, even as incremental process reforms keep rolling out. A split between paperwork getting easier and coverage getting harder to hold on to. And on commercial strategy, Banks expects the visibility versus uncertainty divide to persist, with AI adoption continuing to accelerate while the harder organizational work, redefining where human judgment adds value, remains unsolved. Dealmaking, direct-to-patient sales, and capital markets are all ahead of where these leaders expected them to be. Patient affordability and coverage are behind, even as processes improve. That unevenness, not a uniform trend in either direction, is what will define the second half of 2026 and will decide which parts of commercial organizations need to expand, which need to be rebuilt, and which need to hold steady.